All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Hello, all, and welcome to this very marvelous Monday. My name is Amy Ward, and we are back with our third installment of Portland Cocktail Week and USPG's Make It Mobile programming, sponsored by Kettle One Vodka. Thank you all so much for being here today. Very excited. Today we are talking bar legal basics with Ryan Malkin, an alcohol beverage lawyer who is committed to helping industry professionals achieve their goals. As I can safely assume that there will be a ton of questions for Ryan in this particular subject, we may not be able to address everything because there's probably going to be some very super state and area specific questions, but we will post Ryan's contact info in the presentation. And if he has the bandwidth and the time, he will get to them. But thank you so much, Ryan, for being here to talk to us about the nitty-gritty of compliance.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us everything.
Right, sure. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Malkin. I'm an attorney in the alcohol beverage industry. I'm based in Miami, Florida. I was in New York working for a supplier for several years. And before I started my practice several years ago, and now I work with some of the biggest brands of the world and some of the smallest and help a lot of bartenders who are launching brands and all those within the alcohol beverage industry. So happy to be participating and help out as much as I can. One quick kind of general disclaimer is that none of the information in here is intended for specific legal advice. It's really just for information and educational purposes. And so it doesn't establish an attorney-client relationship or anything like that. It's just kind of for some information and fun. So we'll go on to the slideshow, and here we go. On to the next one, please. Cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about pop-ups and how you can start your own pop-up. There's a few different ways that you can do it, and we're just going to walk through a few of these different options so that we're all on the same page. One option is certainly to go to a bar that's already in existence and sort of rebrand it and sort of quote unquote take it over for the night. Certainly you're not going to take over the bar there because there are some license compliance issues there. You can't what they call avail on a license or use somebody else's license, and you can't profit from the sale of alcohol, generally speaking, without being on the license. So there's some restrictions there, but one option once you work through the compliance issues is potentially go into a space that's already licensed. Another option is to work with a caterer. So basically you would hire a caterer similar to if you were having a wedding or something like that, where you would hire the caterer would work for you. You would manage what products they would be bringing in from the wholesaler, and you would create the decor and all of those sorts of things. And so that could be a potential option. A number of states also have temporary permits where you can literally just go onto the website of the state and apply on your own for your own permit for, that day or 3 days, let's say. New York is a good example where there's a variety there's a miscellaneous permit for spirits and there's a one day permit for beer and wine. So that could be a potential option as well. And there also could be an option where you work with a charity. So you would actually be raising money for a charity and the charity would apply for the alcohol permit. The point at the end of the day, and of course you have to work with your state and local governments to figure out what works for your location, is that the place should ultimately be licensed. You're not going to want to sell alcohol without a license. So figuring it out, first, what's the license is kind of step one. All right, so we can go on to the next one. Now that we're going to assume we have the license type and the license location sort of sorted out and we know what we're going to do there, the next is kind of thinking about some of the business side of it. First is, do you want to form a company? Or are you going to do this on your own? Forming a company has some liability protection benefits, right? So if you start a company, then if something should happen, the person who's going to sue you is not suing you as an individual, but suing your company. So you're sort of shielding your personal assets from liability. So there's obviously a benefit there. And you would want to consider some things like, is this going to be a long-term project in terms of pop-ups around the country? Is this literally just one day in and out? Those are some of the factors you want to consider. You also want to consider trademark and intellectual property concerns. So on the trademark side, is this bar, first of all, on the bar side, is the pop-up going to be something that you're going to continue, perhaps ongoing? Is it going to be something that you want to do and potentially make it a full bar at some point? If you're going to do that, then you probably want to think about, first of all, is somebody else using the name, right? You don't want to use somebody else's name. And then also apply for trademark protection for yourself. There is a difference between common law trademark protection, meaning first to use that name in that particular state, and federal protection, where you file with the USPTO the application for the registration. And the difference is basically that the U.S. is a first to use jurisdiction, meaning the person who uses the trademark registration first, or the trademark first, would have the rights on the state side. And then obviously you want to file federally if you're planning on expanding your operation and going long term with that. Now, on the agreements with third parties, what we're talking about there is if you're going to hire people to work with you or for you, potentially people to even create recipes for you, you want to own the things that they're doing. This is probably most important, I would say, if you're hiring someone to help you with creation of the recipes and also the design and name and look and feel of your pop-up. So if you hired a designer to create your logos or something like that, that would be something where you want to make sure, like, hey, I'm paying you this, I own it. It's not something that you can come later and say, oh, it was super successful, so I get a piece of it. You want to be on the same page with whoever you're hiring. And you can do that with a pretty straightforward agreement that says, this is work for hire, you're doing it for me, I'm paying you this. Okay, cool, we're all on the same page. On the insurance, did you? No, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. I think it's super important for people in our industry to understand how important those simple written agreements are. I think, has it been your experience within this industry that you see a lot of people just doing verbal agreements for whatever kind of work they're being hired for and getting, burnt by that down the line? Like, could you help stress just how important these written contracts and agreements are for us as a collective industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's important because you don't want to get into issues later, right? So the biggest issues are when things are successful. So when things are unsuccessful, there's not really much money to go around, and by and large, nothing happens. But when it does become a success, then yes, there can be an issue. And it is important for everybody to be on the same page for that reason, right? If you think you're going to be successful, and obviously you wouldn't, do whatever you're doing if you didn't think you were, these sort of really straightforward, easy, inexpensive agreements can just at least give you some comfort that, yeah, if this thing blows up and I hired someone to make a bunch of recipes, and those recipes are going to be the, namesake of my new cocktail bar, well, you don't want someone running around being like, oh, I actually created that, I'm going to use it at the bar next door, right? Those sorts of things. You can avoid all of those issues generally with some clear agreements.
Perfect.
And then on the insurance side, you have sort of two pieces that you want to look at. One is sort of the general liability side, where you're just talking about, okay, well, if something happens while someone's on my, premises, then there's general liability coverage for that. But then you also want to make sure you have liquor liability coverage. And that would be for, obviously, if one of your servers is giving somebody alcohol who's underage or intoxicated. And a lot of states have what's called dram shop laws. And obviously you have to look at your states to, verify what's the law in your state. But you do want to check out insurance coverages, and they're really inexpensive for, especially for one-off events. Just, $300, $400, $500 potentially. And that would cover you to make sure that if something should happen, your cat is covered.
Got to make sure the cat's covered. Very important things.
So, those are really inexpensive things you can do to make sure that you're covered for your event. And I think we can go on to the next one. Cool. So a lot of people are obviously doing cocktails to go. Most people are well aware of what's compliant and okay in their state. And with a lot of states making cocktails to go permanent, it's really a good opportunity for bars and bartenders to kind of expand their offerings. which is great. And, and as an example in Florida, the cocktails to go legislation that was made permanent, and this is similar to a lot of states, requires that it be in a sealed container for off-premise consumption and accompanied by food. Things like that are pretty common for cocktails to go. But the idea is that you're going to be creating potentially really good cocktails for people to try, and cocktails to go can be a great way for bars and bartenders to sort of dip their toe into potentially starting even a brand of their own. And you're seeing if these particular cocktails work well within your customer base, and if it does, maybe you want to expand it from there. So let's talk a little bit about that if we want to move on to the next one. So here we're talking about the idea that if you wanted to, and you put, there's certainly mobile canners who come to bars and put whatever cocktail you create into cans, and now you can, basically use that as your cocktails to go. And and this is what I'm talking about, if you wanted to give your brand a try, it's an easy way to do it. So now you have a sort of a really good cocktail that you've made that you think that might do well in the larger audience. And so we're going to say, okay, let's start this brand. And how would you do that? Let's just run through kind of the basics of how you might start a cocktail brand on your own. So let's go on to the next one. So when you start a brand, you have to start looking at a number of different regulatory bodies that you're going to be contending with. On the one hand, on the far left, you have the TTB, which stands for the Alcohol, Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. The TTB is basically the federal body that governs alcohol in the U.S. in terms of formulation and labeling and licensing of distilled spirits plants and wholesalers, those sorts of things, and also advertising and marketing. The ingredients in your product would be approved by TTB, and those ingredients have to be what they call generally regarded as safe by FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So, if you're including, as an example, CBD or some sort of cannabis product, that would obviously be illegal within, coming into drink products. You have to be careful there. If you're using other products that are not generally regarded as safe, you would, have problems getting TTB approval, whereas maybe a state might, think it's okay, that sort of a thing. The Attorney General office, not a huge concern initially. That's really more regarding some sweepstakes contest and charitably related activities. So we'll skip that for now. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, does regulate advertising and also spokespeople. So there is some sort of crossover there. And then, of course, your besides TTB, your major governing body is going to be your state ABC board. So basically what we would do is you would sort out, obviously, where you're going to get your product made. You would have the label and formula potentially approved by TTB, registered in your state. One thing you're going to want to talk about is, of course, when you own a bar, we're going to go to the next slide here. There's some tied house concerns, which means that bar owners typically can't have an interest in manufacturers. So we'll want to, sort of consider that as you go. But let's go on to the next one to sort of run through some TTB basics. So the TTB has what they call their general sort of tied house and trade practice regulations. And these are kind of the biggest ones. And some of these are not going to be a big deal, but it's really more when we're talking about bar basics, it's just things that you should really just be mindful of being in the bar business. So while not necessarily applying immediately to you, just be mindful of these things. So an exclusive outlet, as you can see here, it's basically requiring somebody to purchase alcohol from one particular supplier. Tied house, again, this is where you have an industry member inducing one retailer to purchase its products from the supplier. It also is sort of a term which relates to, as I mentioned before, a retailer having an interest in a manufacturer or vice versa. Commercial bribery, again, this is where you're inducing somebody to purchase your products. and consignment sales where you have the right to return. So it's not that you need to necessarily, be experts in all these things. It's just so that you're aware of the concepts, and then you can dig into those concepts and at least be like, oh yeah, I remember that. Maybe this is that, and I can look into it at that point. So that's the idea there. Let's go on to the next one. We'll talk about kind of one of the biggest ones. This is where you want to be sure, if you did happen to start a brand of your own, that you're not inducing somebody to purchase this new brand of yours to the exclusion of others. We don't have to necessarily worry about the interstate commerce piece right now, because obviously your product will be, sold in interstate commerce. But what that means is, inducement means is that you're giving something of value. You're giving something that's not permissible by the rules to a bar, and that's going to exclude the bar from purchasing another competitor's product. Sometimes you don't even have to have the exclusion element. It can just be the inducement part of it. And so just simply giving something of value could be impermissible. So again, this is just so you have some basic understanding of where you're going if you do venture into these territories of starting a bar, because sometimes, not starting a bar, but a brand. Because sometimes people coming from behind the bar to the supplier side may not be mindful of all of these things the same way somebody coming from the supplier side may. So let's go on to the next one. And here's where we can talk a little bit about what that label, because the label when you do a cocktails to go program at your bar is going to be different than the label you would have if you had a federally licensed and approved label, right? I mean, you can just put a small sticker potentially on your cocktails to go, which obviously is not going to work federally. So on the federal label, just so you kind of have a concept here of what would have to be included. Oh, did you have a question? No. Okay. You'd have the brand name. Obviously, in this case, it would be Kettle One. And depending on your product, you might have if it was one of the spritzes, there'd have a fanciful name of, the grapefruit and rose, I think it was spritz. So there's different fanciful names depending on the type of product you have, if it is what they call distilled spirit specialty or versus a straight vodka. But anyway, you would have the brand name. You would have to have the contents, right? So 750 or 1.5, whatever it might be. The alcohol by volume, such as 80%. You would also want to have your government warning, which you see in all the labels there. And it's a very specific, exact wording that's required. And then you're also going to want to have, or going to have either an import statement, like the case of Kettle One, or obviously if you're creating it domestically, it would be a bottle by statement wherever the bottler might be located. And so those are kind of the basics in terms of the labeling. And now I think we can open it up. We have about 10 minutes left. We can open it up to any questions.
Yeah, so I got a couple that already came in.
I know I went really fast, so
no,
trying to fit it all in.
You're perfect. You gave us plenty of room to be able to ask a few questions, so that's awesome. Taking it back to one of the initial slides when we were talking about the agreement forms, a question came through of where do you recommend people get some kind of like skeleton document to utilize for these contracts and agreements that they're putting together?
There's probably a number of resources online. Obviously, I would recommend speaking to an attorney who's familiar with the industry, and there's a number of ways to reach out. Obviously, you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to put folks in touch with people who are in your area. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's other resources that have free agreements, and just searching on Google. But I wouldn't necessarily vouch for any of those. I just don't know them well enough to say, because obviously I do them on my own. So yeah, I would just say try to speak to somebody locally and go from there.
And so when it comes to things like LegalZoom and those online free resources, you wouldn't necessarily go for that?
No, I'm not saying I wouldn't. I just don't know, and I don't use them. So I wouldn't necessarily vouch for them or say that they're not worthwhile. Maybe they are. I just don't know enough about whether or not they would work for this particular purpose or not. Gotcha. So maybe perfect, and it may not be perfect. I just don't know.
What about some sliding scale or free resources that people could utilize to get a professional hand on it? Would you recommend looking at law schools and seeing if maybe those people might have?
Maybe, but also I think that there's different guilds and other resources for bartenders and industry professionals, and also freelance guilds and things like that that do offer those services.
Okay.
But I think perhaps the best route to make sure you're getting something specific to what you need is really to speak to somebody in your, an attorney in your area. Mm-hmm. But it is possible that some of the guilds do have that as well. I know on some of the supplier guilds the craft spirits guilds that I work with, we do have a lot of free resources like that we offer. So it just depends on if a guild by you or that you're affiliated with has some of that stuff too.
And you're welcome to mention those guilds in here too, if you want to direct people to that for those resources. Do you know if they have like Instagram handles or websites that might be easy to access?
Well, they're more related. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of American Craft Spirits Association, but it's more obviously for the craft spirits producers. Mm-hmm. So I would suggest that I don't know if USBG or any of those would have these sort of resources either, but I'm more than happy to put people in touch, definitely with attorneys in their area who are at least familiar with the alcohol industry.
Okay.
And there's a number of ways to find people in your area as well. Like NABLA is a website where you can find people who are specifically focused on licenses, like liquor licenses in your area by state. Mm-hmm. So some of those resources. Okay.
Perfect. I have a question specifically when you were talking about some of the TTB specifications. The question is, if you can answer, if bar owners cannot have an interest in manufacturers, does that mean that a bar owner with an RTD cocktail could not sell it at their own bar?
So there's a number of exceptions to the general Tide House laws. So a manufacturer typically can't have an interest in a bar. Of course, there's exceptions. Some of those exceptions, just by way of example, think of craft distilleries, right? Craft distilleries, often a privilege of that is to also have a bar on your premises. And mm-hmm. that's why when you go to a distillery, you have cocktails. So a lot of the laws are like that. But then in terms of a bar owner having their own RTD brand, there are private label laws in a lot of states as well. So the answer to the question is a little bit potentially nuanced, but there is, like I said, a private label law in a lot of states that will allow a bar to create its own line of cocktails that could be sold either at only their bar or potentially outside their bar as well, depending on the state. So unfortunately, the answer is a little fact specific, but there are some options potentially.
Okay. Well, I know this person is from Texas, Chandler. You've got his email up there too, so hopefully you'll be able to follow up for more specific questions for that. And not sure if you can answer this, but somebody had stated that they utilize Flip for their liquor liability coverage. So question one, are you familiar with that? Question two, does that cover them in the same capacity for mobile?
I'm not familiar with them, so I don't know. It could be a great option. I just don't know. Okay. And then I'm not sure what you mean by mobile.
The mobile programming, and LaShawn is actually in our group itself, so we might be able to get a little bit more specific during our workshop a little bit later today too.
Okay, great.
So cool. Well, Ryan, I think we're coming up towards the last little bits here. Any other parting words or lovely things of recommendation for our people in the industry?
I guess I would just say that, a lot of times people think that some of the rules and some of the ways to sort of do pop-ups and even start a brand potentially are really difficult and, it's almost too much work to kind of think about and a lot of little legal things to worry about, but it's actually not as bad as maybe you would think. It's almost like a little bit of a process, an assembly line, like do this, do this, do this. Mm-hmm. And, we work through all those issues all the time. So I would say if you want to do it, there's oftentimes a way to do it. And just, obviously if you have a goal in mind, then shoot for it and contact a lawyer in your area if you need any help. And obviously, I'm happy to point people in the right direction, and always happy to support the industry as best I can.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Ryan. And then, so we've got your email address here. There you go. Thank you. Beautiful timing. That is your Instagram handle as well. And then we have that one. We have the professional. They both speak to who you are and what you do.
Right.
So it seems like it's a good option to contact you at either one of them. But thank you so much, Ryan, for breaking down more of the nitty-gritty things that can really get us can be roadblocks to our entry into this field, into doing mobile cocktailing. But again, thank you so much. And for everybody else that is watching us right now, thank you for joining in for Bar Basics. If you enjoyed this class, please smash that like or love button. I'm really enjoying being able to say this now. Show some love in the comments. If you want to see more of the Make It Mobile classes like this one, please follow Portland Cocktail Week on Facebook and YouTube. We have new classes every Monday, and an archive. Our past classes are in the video tab here, which is the facebook.com/PDXCW. And we're going to have those videos as well on YouTube for folks that aren't on Facebook or can't catch us live. We're also on Instagram and at PDXCW, so you can find out what's coming up next. I believe next week is going to be another awesome thing and a return of a human that I adore very much so. So we have so much stuff going on and so much exciting things coming up. So thank you again. Thank you, Ryan. And I'll see you shortly for our more in-depth workshop in just a little bit. So thank you all so much and have a marvelous Monday.